So welcome to the 7th edition of the T2X Commentary. This is Down Among the Dead Men, Mission 7. This is our first Undead map, and we thought this would be a good opportunity to take a little time out and talk a little bit about our briefing art, because we've been watching these briefings in front of all the missions, and we really haven't had a proper chance to talk about them and to talk about the people responsible for bringing them to life. Right. So in the very beginning, we knew that we wanted to tell the story partially through briefings the way that the original Thief games did. We thought they served a number of important functions. They would give the player information about the mission that they were about to play, tell them about their objectives, and just kind of atmospherically set the mood. And it would also develop the character a little bit more. It would give us a chance to develop Zaya. So we needed to have a separate team of not just artists, but specialized sketch artists and briefing artists who would be able to bring these little movies to life. And although they're mostly comprised of still images, they are still require a tremendous amount of effort to bring to life, and that's actually one of the reasons why we ended up cutting them from Thief 3, was because they just require so much time and effort to do correctly. So in the very beginning, the first briefing mission art that we had finished was for Mission 1. And Saturnine, the artist who helped us out from the beginning, was the one responsible for doing all the initial drawings. He did a number of concepts for Zaya and Kadar, and ended up doing the 6 mission drawings for Mission 1, and that was kind of our test case. After we had that done, we didn't have it assembled, but we had all the artwork. We knew we wanted to bring that level of style and that kind of quality to the rest of the mission briefings. So that's when the plot team went out and really started writing scripts for the rest of the briefings. And so we had 2 parts to the script. We had a number of still images, and they were described verbally on paper, and then we had the narration that was to go over that.
Yeah. And Saturnine, of course, is I guess a bit of a celebrity in the Thief community for his mission, the 7th Crystal, which everybody really enjoyed.
Yeah, he did artwork for a number of maps. He did, like, for example, the briefing drawings for the Inverted Mans, and was responsible for 7th Crystal and for a number of other little community projects, and really just a first-rate, fantastic artist. But the problem was that when all the briefing scripts were written, we really had over 70 drawings scheduled at the start, and although, he was really ambitious, like a lot of really talented guys, he really wanted to overextend himself. There's no way that a single person could do 70 drawings,
Right.
And eventually we actually had to cut it back to about 50 because the plot team was really ambitious and scheduled out I think like 6 to 8 briefing drawings for each individual briefing, which was even more extensive than the original missions. And we eventually made some smart cuts and decided to go with a more reasonable number, most of them 3 to 6. And
that was a painful process as well.
Yeah, it was, because we have to be succinct and be realistic about what we can accomplish, and even so, even with like 50 or 60 drawings and the 12 briefings that we had, that's still just hugely ambitious for the number of people that we had.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of people from the community just come out and volunteer right off the bat to do briefing drawings, because they're the type of art that's kind of self-contained. And any individual person can do 1 or 2 or 3 drawings and then choose to go on their separate way if they wish. They don't have to make a long-term commitment. So we took samples from people, and we basically made assignments near the start, and we assigned briefing art out. As we started to get the briefing drawings back, we came to realize, that people had radically different styles, and that even though we had kind of an established standard and something that we were shooting towards in terms of quality, that sometimes it was difficult to meet those standards. Even for professional artists, that's sometimes difficult for them to adapt to a particular style of 2D imagery. And on top of that, we had some people who are skilled in Photoshop, but the vast majority of people were not. They were only sketch artists, so they had scanned drawings that were rough around the edges and not polished and smooth. Didn't look like we could actually use them in the briefing drawings themselves. So for a long time, we had kind of a bit of a crisis, about how we were going to make the briefings look consistent and uniform and still deliver in terms of quality. And there was actually one point in time where I think Saturnine, who was very interested in the briefings, was kind of panicked for a little while because we showed him a bunch of the briefing artwork, and he was like, we can't use this. He didn't want to be a dick about it and say that it wasn't up to par quality wise, but he was very adamant about the fact that we needed some kind of process in order to bring all the drawings up to a quality level, and we were all on the same page. We all totally agreed about that. But I think you and I, Fett, were a little more confident in that. We were of the opinion that we could get it done, and we did eventually. So near the end of the project, when we were making our final cuts to the briefing scripts, and we were really getting a lot of the artwork in, I had one of our artists, Dan Staten, who's actually a professional guy, come in and run like a test where he did like a post processing on some of on a couple of the briefing drawings to see if he could take some that were good but were a little bit rough around the edges, and then smooth them out and apply some Photoshop technique to get them looking consistent with the other drawings that we liked. And sure enough, it worked. Very, very, very well.
Yeah, very, very relieved about about the result of that.
Yeah, and so at the end, what we ended up doing basically was Dan Staten, one of our favorite briefing artist guys, and Rohan and Saturnine were assigned basically a bunch of the drawings, and they took them and through the process of probably only maybe a few dozen hours or a work week or two, were able to convert them successfully, I think, to really shippable, high quality briefing images that looked consistent enough to one another to pass inspection, which is really pretty amazing considering the volume and the amount of artists that we had.
Right. It was a bit of a painstaking process too to go through and figure out, okay, we're obviously not going to have time to do all these drawings. Which ones can we cut without destroying the the story that we're trying to tell here in the briefing? And I remember didn't we pull artwork from some other places too that we weren't originally going to use in the briefings? Or
yeah, we did. We actually ended up using a couple concept pieces in our briefings when we didn't plan it that way. We borrowed a couple pieces of artwork here and there. We used screenshots, but again, whenever we took those pieces, we applied the post processing to them, and as a result, they ended up looking just fine. Right. And the Looking Glass briefings that they did for Thief and Thief 2 occasionally employed screenshots. Really kind of scaled back. They really only had like four drawings per briefing. Sometimes they relied on other images too. Right. So we actually created briefings that were at least as ambitious as those, if not more.
Right.
And the only other thing I'll add is that we decided to go with kind of a brown, like sepia tone look to the drawings instead of the black and white look from Thief 2. We were considering both looks, but ultimately we decided we liked the color a little bit better. It gave a little bit more mood, and it helped mask some of those differences between drawings even more, I think. It makes them appear even more stylistically consistent. So, there are some times when you can look at some of the briefing drawings and you can kind of tell they come from different people, but all in all, I think it's certainly as good as you can expect from any project like this, from any professional project for that matter, with so many different artists.
Using different artists. That's what I was going to say. I felt like part of whatever discrepancies there were, again, just reminded us as we played it that this isn't something that one or two people masterminded and put together, that it was a collaboration, again, from a community that was just trying to pay tribute to the original briefings that we enjoyed so much from Looking Glass. And so to do that, you want to employ the artists that are there within the community, and they're all going to have a different style. But the challenge was getting them all
to a point where they look like they could be put together back to back and then be assembled into movies.
Right. And I think most of the time you struck that balance pretty good in the editing that you guys did with them, and that Saturnine did that. It wasn't such a drastic style change between some of the pictures that it was jarring or anything like that. It was
and again,
familiar again.
It was just a process that we needed to develop. We couldn't, by blunt force, just assign all those drawings to one or two people. We needed a process where we could draw on the talents of many different people and still get them to a shippable state. So that was a real challenge. But as it turned out, we were right to be confident in this one particular case, and it was just a matter of finding the right people and the right technique. Right. So we were really grateful those Photoshop guys at the end, those talented artists could bring everything together.
Yeah, and I still just a lot of times even playing the original games, I'll just escape out of the the briefings and stuff, but I always like watching our briefings, particularly because of the artwork that's underneath the quotes at the beginning, and we use some of that. We double them, have used the same background in 2 or 3 missions, but it's just gorgeous to me. Some of the artwork and the camera work, if you want to call it that, that's underneath the quotes, to me is even better than some of what we saw in the original games.
Yeah, it was very ambitious, and that was all pretty much driven by the cutscene guys. That was Saturnine and Caffeinated Zombie and Joss. Yeah. We told them that we wanted thematic backgrounds for each faction, and they pretty much ran with it and designed what they wanted.
Yeah.
And
again, it's just for us, when we saw those, when you get that kind of, as a writer, when you get that stuff back and you're watching it, all it does is it really makes you excited to go back and write even better stuff and try to, a lot of times even, with the quotes, we would see kind of where the briefing was going as far as the editing, or, we'd get some of this artwork, and you're looking at your quote over the top of it going, we might need, but once it was there, you couldn't change it. That was the thing. Once you gave them the quote and they put it in the video, we're not changing that because it takes too long.
I think we only did in like 1 or 2 cases. We made small revisions.
Yeah, but you really wanted to be sure that, what you gave them was the final thing. But it was just nice to see for me to see something that I had worked on as far as the writing over that beautiful artwork. It just was a great sense of accomplishment to that. And, also you're looking at it and just thinking, wow, this looks professional. This is going to be something that we just knew a lot of people were going to enjoy, and it was going to be very reminiscent of Looking Glass and the stuff that Rust Monkey had done. Yeah,
we had no excuse. I mean, after spending so long in development, so we really needed the highest quality possible, pretty much by the time we released. Yeah. But fortunately, I think the briefing assembly process went by really pretty fast. We had rough drafts that were originally done by God Is My Goldfish, who took all the drawings and all the narration. The narration was done independently by Win, playing Zaya. And he assembled them together, and we kind of got a feel for pacing and for how things were going to flow together. But ultimately, the final cuts were put together by Saturnine. He took those and he made some changes. He redid them pretty much from the ground up. Pasted the drawings in a way that felt right to him, and put in sound effects and polish and just all these things on top of it to finally get him to a shippable state. And he did it so late that he actually didn't get credit for it in the cutscene, in the credits movie cutscene. But Saturnine was actually the guy that put it all together at the end.
But we're giving you credit now, so
yes.
If you're listening to this,
yes.
Well, and I don't know if I didn't catch it if you did it, but there's might want to mention there's a tombstone there in the graveyard that's a little bit of an Easter egg where it says R.I.P. Looking Glass or LGS. And, so you can find that if you haven't found it before. Yeah. But that was kind of a nice little touch by Madger.
So this is a good place to jump in with the fire crystal that you pick up here. So the players had the ice arrows for several missions now, and is probably used to the mechanic of changing their arrows back and forth. And we really had to wait a few missions before we gave them the next piece of the power-up, because we really had objective restrictions throughout Sunnyport where the player couldn't be seen or attack the smugglers and couldn't kill the hammers. So this was really a good opportunity here in this mission to give the next piece of the puzzle, which is the fire crystal.
Yeah, the flare, and of course it turns into a flare, which is great for dispatching the legions of puking undead that are attacking you.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like we were curious about what we could do with fire arrows, because we knew we wanted each of the crystals to convert over by this point. And a fire arrow is already a very offensive, very effective weapon. So what else could we do with it? Well, we thought, aside from creating the obvious dynamic light, we thought the other thing that we could do is make it influence the flee systems on the AI. Right. And so we thought it would be neat to, if it emitted a bit of a holy signal, did a little bit of holy damage, and then caused undead around to flee. And that way it could be extremely useful to get out of tight situations where you're surrounded by a lot of zombies, because one of the things that characterizes a lot of the zombie gameplay is large numbers of these slow-moving guys in these spaces, and it's real easy to get trapped. And so this tool kind of provides a way for the player to get out, because when they shoot it into the ground or nearby, then all the undead are going to run away. Mm-hmm. And it means it's not super powerful either, because all the undead are going to come back in 30 seconds. But it does give you a window of opportunity to escape or to attack them further, or do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, just another option. And do you remember, I remember having discussions about, the pace or the rate at which we would reveal these new weapons or give shards of the crystal. And the problem with this one was that Malik was the one who gave her the first one, and originally we just thought, well, Malik, as time goes by, will give her these different shards, and all of a sudden we realized, wait a minute, Malik is nowhere to be seen. Zaya's in Sunnyport. Malik isn't there. Where's she going to get this from? And I don't remember who came up with the idea if that was Mazur that came up with the idea to put it here, or how that ended up happening, but this seemed an appropriate place, I guess.
Yeah, to find it hidden amongst in a mausoleum with a bunch of Hammerite artifacts scattered throughout. That seemed like an appropriate place for it, and it was, of course, the perfect mission to find it gameplay-wise, because this is where all the undead are, and so naturally you want to be able to use the weapon immediately.
It was a little bit of a happy accident, I think, though, the way that came about. That it was the right time to reveal it, and we had an undead mission, and. But I just remember the plot team kind of being hung up trying to figure out how are we going to work that in, because the guy that's giving her these is nowhere around, but it worked out.
So this is a nice little ghost scripted sequence here.
I think this is me that's getting beheaded here. This was painful. I got to tell you, that blade slicing through the spine and it's rough, and my wife was very upset about this whole thing. But,
and then there's a little head in the bucket.
I don't look so good.
When we wrote the original mission document for this, we really didn't have very many subplots for it. So the primary mission author on this, Mazur, is the guy who came up with this Mausoleus storyline, and everybody really liked the ghost elements from Trail of Blood and Thief 2. We thought ghosts are an interesting way to have conversations in an undead mission and to tell the story, so he made good use of them here to kind of reveal bits of the plot.
Yeah, and it took quite a bit off the plot team, because this was a really big mission. And to be honest, we really, at this point in the plot, I can't speak for Dave, but I remember having conversations with Valletta and Toolhead, and even with Strange Blue in the original plot chats, that at this point you're kind of stretching a little bit to the players gonna be asking, why in the world is she? Oh, there's the vomit. Yeah. There's the vomit with the flies. Yes. But you don't want to stretch the believability too much, and it's kind of, we didn't want it to feel contrived, but we knew it was a little bit of a stretch. That she wants to set up the smugglers. There were obviously easier ways for her to do that than to go down here and risk her life trying to get an artifact that was so dangerous to get to, and so we're aware of that hopefully the player's kind of going along with us at this point and willing to just accept this is what she needs to do, and there were some story reasons.
Undead map,
and we wanted to have the undead map, but it was really a nice thing that Mazur in developing this storyline with Mausoleus, and here of course he's killing his family. He says, if I can't have you, then no one can. And so right at the beginning, wow, there's more going on here than just the Hammerites looking for the ore. But what it did was it allowed us to really focus on the main story, which was Onum going in here, feeling betrayed by Cavador, getting slaughtered by the undead, and then of course leaving the orb for Zaya to get and plant with the smugglers. And it was there's just a lot going on plot wise that we had to establish, and the relationship between Cavador and Onum was a little bit. Was a little deeper, than.
So allowing the subplot to be carried over and allowing Mazur to develop that.
It took a lot off us. It took some pressure off of us. What else are we going to do with this mission? And he just took it and ran with it. And it really, to me, it's one of the better subplots in the game. And we were real happy that he was able to do that.
Yeah, I guess we can give you a little bit of development history of this map, but both of our undead missions seem to be kind of cursed because they both went through several revisions and they were both problematic for different reasons. But originally, this map was worked on by Secluded Memory at the very start, and he built an entirely different version of the map. And again, that was near the very beginning. He was not one of the most experienced guys, and we didn't have like a full mission document. We didn't have any art resources, and so again, it was one of those scenarios where we really didn't set him up for success. And as a result, there were problems with the map and things we wanted to change and rebuild. And eventually we parted ways, and we're happy to get Mazur. Mazur was responsible for building Durant and was actually an architect in real life, so he was a good find for us. Right. And he was anxious to get on this and build an undead map. He built a first version of this, which I didn't like a whole lot. I guess I felt there was not enough connectivity, and there was some weird player movement things. Like the very start of the map, you had to jump like 10 stories down into this huge pool before you could get to the mausoleum and stuff, and just things that weren't really jiving for me. So we talked about it for a while, and eventually he did this second draft, which was the third draft of the mission overall, and this is the one that we ended up with. And this is a little bit different. It has 3 main areas. It's got the graveyard, it's got the underground catacombs, and then it has the church. And he interconnected them all with all these kind of hidden underground passages, but made it believable so that there's a real path that where the Hammerites would travel to bury their dead, and it seemed to work out pretty well.
All right. And one of the things I enjoyed about this mission, I thought was great. You're always scared when you do an undead mission that it's going to be compared to the Bone Horde, and then and even with fan missions, there's the I can't remember the name of it now, but there's a T1 fan mission.
Oh, Bloodstone Prison.
Bloodstone Prison, yes.
The main reason we wanted to get Kung Fu Gecko for a while.
Right,
so
right.
Yeah.
And those were just brilliant. And of course, anytime for me, anytime I play a fan mission, if it's an undead mission, I'm always thinking of those two missions specifically. And so the thing that I thought was great about this and the design was that you go through quite a bit of hoopla to get to the Bone Horde with the caves and all that kind of stuff. But then when you get in there, with the exception of maybe the Alaris extension, it's pretty much intact. It's there's dead bodies laying around and stuff, but I mean it's not crumbling and falling apart and rotting. It's a pretty nice planned crypt, and this had a little more of a scattered feel to you had some of these separate buildings, and these doors are all nasty and torn up, and there's really nothing elegant about the way that people were buried in here, because it's just, you got the torture chamber, you got it's just really falling apart, and it's very decrepit, and that to me just made it different enough that it was unique, and I didn't feel like I was just playing the same mission as I played in Dart Project, in the Bone Horde or whatever. Yeah,
we're always challenged to try to bring new gameplay and new ideas and new atmosphere to each one of our missions. So this ended up being pretty unique.
Yeah, and then of course,
here we.
Do you want to talk about the bug with the Mausoleus thing, or do you want to wait till the end?
Yeah.
Or should we not talk about that at all?
No, we can talk about it. So in the first draft of the mission, Mazur had, well, actually, I shouldn't say in the first draft. I should say in an early version of this map, Mazur had a couple spots where the player had to use rope arrows in order to advance. One of them was over the flaming lava pit, and one of them was to get the orb at the very end of the mission. And I was always very much opposed to that, because I think you can't count on the player not expending all the resources. You can't potentially screw the player over like that. There always has to be some kind of secondary way that you have to complete the mission. Right. And it's something that we actually disagreed upon, because he'd say like, well, you required arrows in your 2 fan missions before you worked on T2X, and I was like, yeah, that's because I was a bad designer, because that's like the thing to do.
We use the inverted mantis. Well, that guy that did the inverted mantis did it that way. So why can't we?
No, but I think the most egregious of the two was getting the orb at the end. We wanted to really make sure that all players could get the orb, no matter what their inventory was, or no matter how many weapons they saved. So he actually had independently come up with this idea that you could destroy Mausoleus by burning his bones. And so we said, okay, well,
great idea.
That's a great idea. I mean, why not link the two? Why not make the orb like really inaccessible, as if like his spirit is guarding it, and then like if you destroy him, then suddenly his magic and his charms fail, and now the orb is in a much friendlier place to grab. And so that solved the problem really well. And I was actually the one to implement that in this mission, because it was very much a last minute fix. And sure enough, it introduced a bug where if you had already...
The bug. It is the
bug.
T2X bug.
Yeah, if you had already stolen the orb and it was in your inventory and then you burned his bones after the fact, then the orb would disappear from your inventory and go back to the place where you're supposed to steal it from. So it didn't make them. It didn't break the mission. It didn't make it unwinnable. It just meant you had to go all the way back and steal it again, which was a colossal pain and totally my fault.
But I think that's the number one question I've seen on the forums is, where did the orb go? You know?
I mean,
I
think even though that's a bug, I think that's better than the alternative, which is potentially screwing people over by forcing them to use an inventory item they may not have.
Right.
So it was a lesser of two evils, and we definitely fixed it for the patch. So there's
and there's some attempts to compensate for that along the way. For instance, one of the tombs that you go into and you push the button for the secret and you get like 4 rope arrows.
Yeah.
And typically when you see something like that, in a fan mission at least, you go, the light bulb kind of goes on. You go, there's something coming up that's going to require, a lot of rope arrows. I really need to be careful about my rope arrows. But you can't depend on everybody figuring that out, and you sure don't want to have them frustrated at the end of of what is a really good mission with something like that. So I love the design of this, the figure 8 thing where you could and again non-linear, just that classic Thief thing where there's like I think 3 different ways to get over into there, at least 2. You can go through the Tomb of the Forgotten King, come out over there.
Yeah, it's very well interconnected.
There's just a lot of neat little
areas. I actually kind of have mixed feelings about the multi-tiered crypts in there because you can kind of escape the zombies in the gameplay by getting up top, and it makes the zombies feel a lot less threatening. But maybe that's all right because not everybody really likes dealing with massive amounts of zombies anyway.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of being eaten by zombies, I have to say.
That's actually one of the high-level things that we talked about very early was how we could make zombies more fun. And so we introduced a couple new behaviors which made them more interesting to say the least, I think. The first thing we did was we gave them a ranged attack, which was the vomit attack that they spew on you. That was kind of inspired by Resident Evil and other zombie games. And we did that all through, if you know DromEd, we did it all through watch object links, basically. Like when the zombie gets close to you and detects your presence and sees you and hasn't vomited within the past 15 seconds, then he spews vomit at you. And you have
kind of like in real life, the way that zombies do,
Yeah, but anyway, that took a couple days to hook up, and we want to make sure to get the flies in there and make it really nasty.
Well, I think if I remember correctly, it was Alex Gingerbread Man that didn't come up with those ideas, but when we were talking about Undead Mission, he said, the problem with zombies, and one of the reasons they probably didn't include them a lot in T2 is because really once you've realized how slow and stupid they are, they're not really that scary anymore. We need to make some scary ass zombies, and so speeding up their walking speed, where they were a little faster, and of course the ranged attack. I mean, that to me at least made them a threat again, and they really weren't. By the end of the Dark Project, you pretty much figured out you could outrun them. But these guys, there's so many of them, and the ranged attack really sucks if you get caught in it, and they were scary again, and I thought it was a nice improvement.
Yeah, and we had some nice new zombie models, new zombie textures, so they're totally different. And of course, the other thing that we did was we made them dismemberable.
Right.
And we thought one of the reasons why people were frustrated with the zombies in the original Thief games is because you couldn't knock them out and you couldn't really kill them with your sword. The only way you could kill them was with explosives or holy water.
Which was scarce.
Yeah, and we had no mechanism for holy water in T2X because that would have it would have interfered with the way that we did ice arrows, basically.
Well, it also would make sense for Malik, who is a pagan, to be
against holy
water. Supplying her with holy water. I mean, it just didn't really work with the fiction either.
Yeah, exactly. And so what we thought was we could find a way to make them a little bit more vulnerable to your base weapons. And just studying how Looking Glass set up the weak points on the Mechanist robots in Thief 2, we figured, hey, well, we can take it a step further. And we can do some really radical kind of dismemberment effects here. And this was basically just brute force scripting. There's all different zombie models for every different type of dismemberment. Right arm, left arm, both arms, one head, right arm, etc. And we just set up signal scripting on them, sources and receptrons to detect when you hit them in a very particular location on their collision cylinder. And if you nail it, then it'll cut off one of their limbs or their head. And behaviorally, they actually respond. If you cut off both their limbs, then they don't attack you anymore. And if you cut off their head, they don't vomit on you anymore. So it all worked.
It's always good when things don't vomit on you. The plot team was in favor of actually being able to disassemble each individual organ, but the design guys kind of came back and said, "Nah, I don't think that's going to. I don't think that's going to happen."
Yeah, for a very brief time, we actually flirted with the idea of having regular humans dismemberable. Just they die like when you cut it off, but we thought that was too goofy, too over the top. We wanted to keep it exclusively as a gameplay device for the zombies.
Yeah. We had a lot of organ-based plot elements actually in the beginning that we had to ditch because we couldn't you couldn't take like the liver of Saint Basmus across the bridge, and because they couldn't do a liver model and didn't want to go to all that trouble, so we scrapped that. And
here you go. Here's a nice little scripted moment. This reminded me of some of Gon Chong stuff like Shunned.
Yeah,
like just a little surprise moment where you're teleported out and you got to face all these zombies. Just a little scary moment.
That's a nice little homage there.
It's just if you pick the wrong element in the puzzle, then now here you go.
You're screwed.
Yep.
Yeah.
So most of these little puzzles I think that are in here were developed by Mazur when he was making the map. They were just kind of isolated little sections where he wanted to give the player a little brain puzzle, and most of them aren't necessary. They just give you some extra rope arrows or loot or what have you.
Yeah, and plot, like I say, plot team was just not. This was probably the most sparse
mission design.
Yeah, as far as the documentation of what we wanted, it was just like scary undead, lots of ways to die. It'd be nice to see some fire elementals because this was like really the only opportunity to use them because you're down underground. There's going to be some lava. We had hoped
another enemy that you never see in Thief 2 that we brought back for T2X.
Yeah, even it was just a cameo, but still. But it was really left wide open. Like you say, that's one of the reasons I think Secluded Memory at the beginning was just he was kind of adrift in a way because we really didn't give him a lot to go on. And, again, luckily Mazur had this idea for Mausoleus, and that really lended, he had a lot of other gameplay things that could happen because of that. But, again, it was nice to as a plot team, sit down and just say, well, this is what we need, and we don't have a lot of specifics, and then see somebody flesh it out like this, and it'd be as fun as it was. It was just a great. I love this moment when you come up over the ladder and this whole thing opens up in front of you, and you're like, oh God, I gotta get across.
Yeah, get across
what a nightmare,
Yeah, that was also very reminiscent of the Lost City. From Thief 1, which is nice, or Kidnap from Thief 2.
And this whole thing, how did this come about here? We're getting to the Crypt of the Forgotten King. How did this idea of the King's Heart come about? That it basically serves as a ward against the traps that are in the tower. Was that Mazur's thing? Or
I think that was Mazur's thing again. He wanted to make getting up to the orb. If you didn't explore the entirety of the map, basically, and you tried to run up to where the orb was being kept, that there would be these sentinels, basically these statues that would make it very difficult for you to cross by shooting you, killing you, shooting magic at you. And so the way that you could avoid that is by exploring the rest of the map and by getting this artifact over here.
See, that's good design.
it is, but I was always kind of curious if that was clear enough, if we had enough readables, if some players weren't ever going to figure it out. I mean, but it is kind of always a good thing when you have an atypical way to force the player to explore the map. Because typically the fallback solution is always to force the player to get a key,
the key hunt. Yeah,
the key hunt. That's not really always the most interesting thing. You ultimately want to dress it up and have something more interesting here that requires just a little bit of brain power.
Right. And again, with the plot team, there's probably so much more that we could have added in here. And we discussed once we played it, and we've got this Crypt of the Forgotten King and all these names in the graveyard, and there's so many little things here. The tomb where we saw the secret with the rope arrows. There's a story behind all these things, and we could go to the trouble of writing documents and somehow contriving to create backstories for all this. But then, I remember as we talked about it, one of the things I think that was so memorable about a mission like the Bone Horde, and even Return to the Cathedral in some ways is that, and the Haunted Cathedral in the original game is that you didn't know what happened. You know, you're in the Old Quarter. There was some type of cataclysm. You don't really know what caused it.
That kind of storytelling can be very effective when used appropriately, and actually I think that's one of the reasons why I like Half-Life storytelling so much too, for Half-Life and Half-Life 2, precisely because not everything is explained. You're basically given a set of information which is relevant to your own situation, but you're not really strung along by a specific plot.
Well, and that's ultimately you come back to how you want the player to leave something to the imagination, and the mysterious, who is this forgotten king, and even some of the aspects of Mausoleus, you don't really know how he ended up the way that he was, and some of that, which I think is good that it was left intentionally up to the interpretation of the player. It took me forever, man. I beta tested this thing probably 100 times before I found that stupid ledge to get around on the side. Now, I'm not good at playing Thief. So I'm down there struggling with the rope arrows and the bridge and trying to get, and the fire elementals are killing me. And then somebody finally pointed out, hey, dummy, there's a ledge around to the side, man. And,
that's actually good. I mean, because we wanted to encourage the use of rope arrows right here, but again, we didn't want to force the player to use them in case they didn't have any left, and so I got Mazur to build a little ledge around the side where, if you were clever, you could spot it and jump up without using any inventory items. It's just it's not terribly difficult. It's just hidden a little bit, so you got to look for it.
It's a nice little touch there. You come upon this gateway, and there's a dead hammer laying there. And what is this other thing? Because it was the new haunt skins.
Yeah.
And you get to see a dead one before you have to actually confront live ones. But it was a nice little moment of foreboding there. Like, oh God, I got
this
a
new
enemy coming up, and where is he? And these spiders. Okay, I've dealt with spiders. Where are these guys? And so this whole time, at least the first time you play it, the whole time going in here, you're ready for this haunt to come walking out from somewhere, and it was just a really nice little touch there. I thought, a little teaser.
And so here, speaking of spiders, this is the spot where we first introduced spider eggs. And originally we were going to introduce these later, but we decided to put them here because this is just the perfect fictional location for them, right in the spider's den. So players are used to the frog bombs from Thief 2, which are basically little bombs that spawn little happy pagan frogs that'll jump around and blow you up. And they were an okay power up. They were lethal and really kind of loud. I think we wanted something a little bit different and a little bit more pagan-y for T2X, so we went with a similar kind of concept. We just spawned spiders instead, and they ended up working out pretty well. We kind of had some back and forth on whether or not they should be hostile to the player, whether or not they should be friendly to the player. We ended up making them hostile to everything. So when you drop a spider in the world, they'll attack anything, including the player.
Right.
And then they'll expire after 30 seconds, the idea being that they're supernatural moss spiders that can't live in our environment for too long, which is just a way to make sure they're not too overpowered or annoying. But I question now whether that was really a good decision to make them hostile to everything. I think we probably would have been better served to make them friendly. But, that's another hindsight thing.
And this is an idea that I'm glad we happened upon, and I can't even give credit because I don't remember who came up with it. But, it may have been Mazur, but the idea that when you get to Basmus's tomb, it's been plundered and the orb isn't there anymore, and so you have an even bigger challenge. You have to go into this tower and all that, and I don't remember if that was part of the original idea or if that's something that Mazur came up with.
I think it's something that Mazur came up with because it makes Mausoleus a really sinister force in the environment. He's no longer just a ghost that you see from time to time.
He's not passive anymore.
Yeah, he's not passive anymore. He's now the guy who's responsible for stealing this orb and for bringing this wrath of the undead down on the hammers.
And it's nice to see the wrath of the undead coming down on the hammers for once, you know?
For a while.
Which we get a little of that in Thief 3, but and this was a really tough section. I mean, I remember beta testing this and trying to get not to Basmus's tomb, but up into the tower with the tile floors and the patrolling haunts and all that. And but it was one of those moments where you just felt like we've really not had just one of those return to the cathedral moments where you're just absolutely terrified, and it's so difficult in places to move around without getting caught, and it's a real challenge. And we ended up leaving it, and I remember several of the beta testers talking about that. It was a really tough section to get through, especially if you're trying to ghost through it, which was a concern. But you can do it. It's just it takes some time to do. But ultimately, I'm glad we left it because it needed to be really hard for her to get this. And again, it goes back to the character motivation. How badly does she want to bring these guys down? She'll risk going up here and going after this thing, to make this happen.
I have again, it's another one of those sections where it might do things a little bit differently if we were doing it over again. I think the only thing that I found frustrating was really having to deal with the undead on the spiral stairs, because there's really nowhere to hide and nowhere to go, and so you really have to have a good sense of where your enemies are in the space and really predict where they're coming down, and that can be a little too challenging. I think I like to keep them kind of isolated on the floor, but like Dave said, I mean, it makes it very challenging and very, very tense.
Yeah.
So
it scares the hell out of you every time.
You hear him before you
think about
see
going
him,
up the spiral stairs, and it's like, where is he? Am I gonna run into him? And that reminds me a little bit of the zombies. And speaking of Return to the Cathedral, the staircase where you're trying to get up and down into the basement to get the power on for the elevators, and you just can't see around the corner, and you just don't know when you're going to run into one of these guys. To me, it just makes for great, tense gameplay. And of course, you've got some tools you can use there.
You should have a fair amount of player tools by this point.
Deal all that damage while he's frozen,
Yeah, for the frozen guys, you can leave them behind. You can attack them with a sword, or you can shatter them with any kind of fire stimulus, like a fire arrow, if you hit them with it.
And now, I know there's some people also that play. It was another gameplay aspect that we didn't really talk about much, but we looked at there's some people that play where they don't want to use any resources, no moss arrows, no water arrows, because you basically don't want to leave any trace of your presence. But it's just really unrealistic in a way to try to design every level that way. And so some of these, if you are going to ghost them, you've got to use the moss arrows to get across the tile floor and still leave the haunts unharmed. Yeah,
and again, those kind of gameplay inventions are just that, are inventions by the community. They're never really intended by the original designers, even of the original Thief missions.
Nice if you can accommodate it, but sometimes it's just it's unrealistic, and it makes it too easy.
For other skill levels. But I mean, that's something that I talked about and confirmed with some of the original Thief developers, and they're all still very much of the opinion that gameplay is something that is, and not something that you imagine it to be. So we want to support as many different styles as possible, but within reason.
Right. Yeah, because you can really screw it up. But this is, there was a scary sequence all the way through here, and the thing with the orb, we're trying to figure out what kind of artifact, what is it that she can steal, and ultimately it didn't really matter, what it was. It was just, it needed to be something that the Hammers wanted, that they thought the smugglers had somehow gotten illegitimately, and just to use to frame them. So this whole fiction with Saint Basmus and all that stuff, it originated with the plot team, but then Mazur just took it and really beefed it up and ran with it,
Yeah, so here's the spot where the orb is, and it's up on the ceiling. And the particles kind of call your attention up top. So you got players to look up. There's a big bright light up there, and the quick way is to use the rope arrow like I'm doing right here. And I guess we should say we've been crediting Mazur with everything, but really he also left the project in the final year, I think, and Gon Chong took this map over and put a bunch of polish on it. Duncan and I think, did a few miscellaneous fixes here and there. We passed the map back and forth a little bit, but I think Gon Chong was the one who basically took it from an alpha state, I think, to a shippable state, to the final state. So he fixed some bugs, did some polish here and there.
And again, it was nice how that kind of happened naturally. That by the end, some pretty much the same guys were having a hand in finishing off all the missions, and it really, I think, especially with the textures, you really started to see it come together as a campaign rather than individual missions. Textures, to me, make a huge difference in that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that we could have done differently art-wise here, because I think there's not quite enough new art resources. There are still a few textures that I think Mazur imported from Thief 1 that are really pretty low res. And we could have beefed it up a little bit, but the problem was we had a finite amount of time and resources, and we put so much effort into getting our second undead mission up to par that this one suffered a little bit from those aesthetics. We probably could have done a few more custom textures and objects for this. Probably could have undid some of the optimizations that we made early on, because this was really built pretty early. And so you have, some cases where textures on the outside are like scaled up and, it looks kind of bad from a distance, but we did that originally for optimization and just never undid it once our system specs were upgraded over time. So this is the final optional objective, where you destroy Mausoleus by burning his bones in the incinerator.
Which, of course, destroys all the other undead, which is kind of nice. If you were running through the mission scared to death and afraid to explore too much, now you can go back and look at all these places. This is probably one of my favorite missions. Just as far as just fun, it was just really fun to play. It seemed just like the right amount of challenge and enough different places to explore that I really enjoyed beta testing this, and just real pleased with how it came out.
I have to say, I was pretty hard on Mazur too, like all the time. Like I really wanted to make the undead mission good, so I gave him a lot of honest feedback, and and he was a trooper. He stuck through and made a really good undead map here.
Well, the last undead map that anybody was playing was Return to the Cathedral, really. So
really, nobody had played any since Thief 1, except for fan missions, of course.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah.
And some of those were pretty good. The Inverted Manse was all right, I guess.
That was okay. That one was okay, yeah.
Some of those were good. But anyway, so there's the undead mission.